This morning, we are talking about reproduction. Reproduction. When we think about reproduction and look to the animal kingdom, we think about cats and rabbits, right? Cats and rabbits. Did you know that cats are among the fastest, I don't have to tell you this, fastest reproducing animals? Yeah, they are. You have a picture? See, there we go. This thing right here. Yeah, no. Just ignore the cuteness factor there. That thing is going to reproduce. And the thing next to it's going to reproduce at an even faster rate. So the cat can have, before this little bitty kitty is done on God's green earth here, she's going to have, or she could have 100 babies. They're capable of having multiple litters in a given year and up to 12 in a litter. So again, cats unimpeded, 100 kitties in their lifetime. Rabbits in one season can reproduce to the point where one single rabbit has, in one season, one breeding season, 800 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Every single rabbit. Now, God has placed some mechanisms in place so that this world is not teeming with rabbits, at least here. But these animals remind us of the way God has designed reproduction. We're coming to the end of our Bible series of what we've been talking about, and we began earlier this year in being made for more. The church is made for more. The church is poised for more. Wherever we happen to be, wherever Jesus has placed us, He is using us to fill society, fill our surroundings with Himself. And He's poised us to do this. The church is poised for more, poised to fill all of society with Jesus Himself. Along the way, we've considered some of the things that go into Jesus filling our lives with more. He uses love, His love, becoming our love, to fill all of society with more. He uses discipleship. We talked about that last week. We also, along the way, realized there's an enemy that doesn't want to see all of this happen. We are made for more. We are poised for more. There was ever a thesis statement. We read it just a few moments ago. This thesis statement is what we have considered all along. These verses here in Ephesians chapter 1, Paul's writing to a congregation much like our own in ancient Ephesus, which is on the western edge of Turkey, what we now know as Turkey. And so as Paul writes, they have a lot of questions, but he reminds them of who they are. He reminds them that they are forgiven, that they are redeemed. And then he says, here's what God is doing with you in Ephesus. He says, God subjected everything under Jesus' feet and appointed Jesus as head over everything for the church, which is His body. And that body is the fullness of the one who is filling all things in every way. So He's using the church to then fill all of society, all of culture, all of our lives with Himself. And we saw how this affects where we work, where we play, where we live, and where we learn. We don't have to really go anywhere for God to do this. It means God's using us where we are, wherever we've been placed. So filling all things in every way simply means that Jesus is using us where we live, where we work, where we learn, where we play, to bring more Jesus into our lives. Bring more Jesus into the lives of others. And He does this through us, wherever we're at. But the question still remains then, where's all this headed? Where's all this going? If this is His plan for the church, if this is His plan for the church at Ephesus, if this is His plan for us, where's all this headed? So the first thing we're going to see is all things. When he says all things, it means all things. Now, we've considered how all things in every way means, again, how we are in our lives, how Jesus is using us to fill all things wherever we're at, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whether it's at play. But there's another way to think about this all things. And Paul addresses it as he continues to write this letter. We kind of skipped over it, but we're coming back to it this morning. You see, in the process, as Jesus uses us in every area of our life, whether it's where we work, whether it's where we play, whether it's where we learn, as he uses us, he's using us to multiply his kingdom. He's using us to reproduce. All things means all things everywhere, not just where we live, not just here in Los Fresnos, but the entire world. Jesus, as we just read a few moments ago, in that conversation with his best friends on that mountain, is talking about spreading the gospel, taking the gospel, going with the gospel, making disciples in all nations, over the whole of the earth, everywhere. He's not just talking about Jerusalem. He's not simply talking about the Jerusalem area. He's not simply talking about Israel. He's talking about all nations everywhere. He expects his message, the good news of his death, the good news of his resurrection, to go everywhere, wherever there's people. So all things means all things everywhere. And as Jesus talks to his best friends, he's using language that we read from Genesis. God had promised that he was going to use Abraham to bless all nations. And Jesus pulls from that. He is talking about that conversation, and he's saying, okay, here's how this is going to happen. You're going to make disciples. You know how Abraham's promise is going to be fulfilled? It's going to be fulfilled as you make disciples. All nations. As numerous as the grains of sand. He said, he even qualifies it, if they could be counted. You can actually Google this question. How many grains of sand are on the face of the earth? Scientists estimate anywhere between 7 quintillion and 5 sextillion. And again, we can never count that high. I can't even get to 10 sometimes. Yeah, between 7 quintillion and 5 sextillion grains of sand on the earth. Now, God is using that as a figure of speech, right? He's using that as a figure of speech. The earth has never seen that many people born. But he wants us to feel the weight of it. He wants us to understand the enormity of the promise. He wants us to understand how big and how expansive his promise is. That it's for all of history, it's for all time, it's for all people. I am going to make disciples of all nations. And here in Ephesians, Jesus is saying he's going to do this through you. He's going to do it through us. Where we live, where we work, where we learn, where we play. But he is going to expand his kingdom. He is going to make good on his promise. That his name and his fame are going to be in all nations. The disciples are going to be made in all nations. Now, the amazing thing about Paul saying this, that he's going to use you to fill all things, that he's going to use you to fill all things with Jesus, he actually makes good on that promise. Dr. Luke tells us, and this is in the book of Acts, it's another book in our New Testament, Dr. Luke tells us that the great missionary Paul and his missionary team show up in Ephesus, and they spend 2 years. And they plant that church. They start off in the synagogue. They get kind of tossed out of the synagogue. Like that's the story in Acts 2. But they end up planting a church. Took them 2 years. But the interesting thing is, here's what happened after they planted that church in Ephesus. Here's the church in Ephesus. All these cities and towns, including Colossae, which we also have a book in our Bibles, these are all church plants. Those are all church plants. That's Ephesus reproducing itself. So over the course of the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, look what happens. God uses the Ephesians to fill all things with himself. It doesn't stay, the gospel doesn't just stay in Ephesus. There's kingdom expansion going on. Paul and his missionary team and others from Ephesus as a hub, planting all these churches and beyond. So this kind of expansion, that's what filling all things meant for the Ephesians. Filling all things with Jesus. Not simply where they work, where they live, where they play, but beyond that, he's using them to multiply and expand. And this pattern that we see, this pattern, by the way, is in the book of Acts. This pattern isn't simply true of Ephesus. This pattern started with Antioch. This pattern is reproduced in other of these churches. In fact, Ephesus itself is a church plant of the church at Antioch. All that to say is this is what it looks like when Jesus uses the church to expand his kingdom, to fill all things with himself. Jesus' plan for the church means he's also going to fill all corners of the earth with himself. Now, where are we headed with this? Well, just so happens that 3 years ago today, 3 years ago this Sunday, St. Paul and Harlingen reproduced itself. St. Paul's to be commended. They're our mother church. We're going to plant the church in Los Fresnos. And see what God has done, and here we are this morning. Oh yeah, Jesus has made good on his promise to the Ephesians. A couple thousand years later, same kind of reproduction is going on. So through St. Paul, church is planted here in Los Fresnos. You see, multiplication is in the DNA of church. We don't think about that too much. We don't think about the fact that when Jesus plants us, and he's really the one that plants us, when he brings us together on a Sunday, the part of the DNA of us gathering is for us to go, for us to multiply, for us to expand. Now the table at some point down the road, I don't know, some point down the road is going to reproduce itself. Here in the RGB. This is Jesus' design for the church. But even as we think about ministry the next 2 or 3 years, I'm talking about this now. Because even as we have our Bible studies, even as we have our groups, even as we talk about, hey, let's do this here, I always want to make sure that we're keeping in front of our minds Jesus' grand plan for the church. Jesus' plan for us to reproduce ourselves. I mean, some of you here are here because of what we've been doing with Little League. Right? We have a worship leader. It's Jesus using the church to fill all things with himself in kingdom expansion. And through simple things like being involved in Little League. I think about the water that we give away. The water we give away is free. We're going to do it again in a few weeks. We're going to give away free pumpkins. But that image is, this is what Jesus has done for us. He's given us free forgiveness. He's given us free salvation. And he wants to multiply himself through our community. He wants to multiply himself beyond our community. So, when we start talking about expansion, this is what expansion would look like, or might look like here in Los Fresnos. And this slide is fluid. Don't make too big a deal about it. All right? This is simply taking that same slide that we have for Antioch, that same pattern that we have for Ephesus. What might it look like for the table of Los Fresnos? So we have something going on in Palm Resaca. We have something going on in Arnie's. We got people living in San Benito. We have people living in Laguna Vista. We have people living in North Brownsville, which was By the way, North Brownsville is one of the fastest growing places in all of the RGV right now. But we have all this. What would it look like for us to begin groups or Bible studies or whatever in these places? Does it mean Jesus is going to make a church out of it? Oh, no. No, in fact, all of this, maybe none of it happens. But this is having something like this in front of us is simply a way for us to remind ourselves about what we are doing here, and that we don't keep this to ourselves. That we don't keep word, that we don't keep sacrament to ourselves. Everything here is on mission. Everything that we do on Sundays is aimed outward, is aimed toward the community. I've mentioned more than once that most of the people that live around us used to go to church. They would consider themselves church people. They're not going to church anymore. Most of the people who live here, it's been years since they've been in church. And so we've made it our mission to re-engage. To re-engage. This is what Jesus' expansion looks like, or might look like, for the table. And again, it's already happening. The fact that we're here right now as a people, Jesus is already using his word and his sacrament to expand himself in our community. You've heard me say it many, many times, and you're going to continue to hear me say it. You're going to get sick of me saying it, probably. That's okay. That none of this is meant to keep to ourselves. I say this, and we say this, because what do we want to do when we get something good? What do we want to do? And I'll plead guilty as charged, right? This starts with me. When kids are playing, I think we got a picture of kids. Well, what happens when the kids are playing? A kid has a toy. He has a toy that everybody wants. Either the kid is popular or the toy is popular. And this starts when they're 1 and they're 2. But that kid, if you got a bunch of kids and he's got the toy, and it might be a popular kid, everybody wants that toy. What is it that you hear? What's the one word that you hear? You walk into that room. What are the kids saying? Mine. 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 Those kids may not be saying it right there, but they're thinking, mine. Mine. We grow up, years later, we're still doing this as adults. It's still part of our fallen DNA, regardless of what it is. But when we have something good, we want to hang on to it. Jesus was in a business of constantly giving himself away. Jesus is always giving himself away. And that's not me. That's not me. I want to hang on to this. I do. I want to hang on to it. I want to grow it. Mine. Jesus gave himself away. It's part of our DNA. Part of how we understand ourselves. We're constantly giving away ourselves. Constantly giving. You see, forgiveness multiplies. Forgiveness multiplies. Paul starts the whole thing off in Ephesians. This whole thing, this whole letter. This letter he's writing to a congregation that has a bunch of questions about who they are and what they're supposed to be doing. And the very first thing he tells them is he reminds them that they are children of God, and he says this: in Jesus, we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our sins, according to the riches of his grace. That is the heart of what it means to be a church. It's the heart of our salvation. It's the heart of our message. It's what's missing out there. You know, most of our neighbors, they've heard this, they know this, they even believe this, They're not hearing it this morning. They're not hearing it this morning. You know, Luther said, what? Somebody asked him, why do you always talk about forgiveness? Because we forget. We forget. And so we come. We come here, we gather here to remind ourselves of whose we are, and to remind ourselves that we are forgiven, to receive forgiveness. Even as we hear the word, even as we participate at the table. But the reality is too then, that if we are forgiven people, the world needs forgiveness. Again, you don't have to spend 2 minutes on Twitter or 2 minutes on Facebook to see all the jawing going on, right? There's a lot of jawing. We're gonna hash this out. We're gonna hammer it out. Cancel culture, both sides. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. Cancel culture. And the cancel culture has forgotten, especially Christians that participate in it, is that we are forgiven people. And that forgiveness translates into forgiveness for my neighbor. Forgiveness for the guy who doesn't vote like me, think like me, look like me, act like me. Forgiveness. The forgiveness that we receive becomes forgiveness for others. And in this cancel culture, the other thing too is you spend any amount of time, you begin to realize that people are desperate for something else. People are upset that there's this canceling going on, even the ones that are involved in it. They don't know what to do with that. Well, we got the answer. We got the answer right here. We got the answer right here. Every Sunday we got the answer. For people that don't understand or don't know or don't even think about forgiveness, we have it. Forgiveness multiplies. Jesus uses this message of forgiveness, that he forgives us unconditionally. Jesus' forgiveness, Jesus' love is unconditional. And many in the church have forgotten that as well. And again, you can see all this all over the internet. We will forgive you so long as you clean up your life. Right? You can have your forgiveness. You can have my forgiveness as long as you clean up your life first. As long as you say the right thing first. Jesus doesn't forgive us that way. Jesus' forgiveness for us is unconditional. He doesn't wait for us to make the first move. He makes the first move. He makes the first move toward us in grace. He knows we need forgiveness, and he forgives us. You know why I'm here this morning? You understand how attractional that is? I want to hear it again. The fact that I'm forgiven actually draws me to hear the word, draws me to the table so that I can hear it again. And that's true for all of our neighbors, all of our friends here in Los Fresnos. So wherever and however Jesus uses the table to expand his kingdom, this idea of forgiveness and grace and salvation is going to be at the heart of it all. Going to be part of it all. So, as Jesus is expanding and multiplying his body, he's doing it through us. He's doing it where we live, where we work, where we play, where we learn. And he's using it with this message of forgiveness. And it's through that message of forgiveness that he's not only going to fill all those areas of our lives, he's going to use us, the table, to multiply, to expand his kingdom throughout Los Fresnos and this area of the RGV. Let's pray.